Hey guys, I'm going to discuss question number 2 on the unique challenges or demands that come up when using compression strategies. I recently observed an interpreter at my church. She's a new interpreter, and I also have worked with her in the K-12 setting, and she's one of my favorite interpreters that I've ever observed. She's, I believe, really talented and skilled, and that's why I chose to review her work. And the situation, so she interpreted the entire sermon, which I actually used for my live observation analysis for another class. So I really pulled apart the work and analyzed it and got to meet with her and discuss, her demands and controls and I got to view that first and kind of comprehend and know what I would do in that situation. And then I was able to ask her during a live situation with her interview. So that was really cool too. So I am going to discuss another explaining by example strategy. And the situation was after the sermon, the deaf ministry meets together, and there's some hearing people, some hearing family members of the interpreters or the deaf consumers, and everybody meets afterwards to kind of go over the sermon, but really to talk together and just have a deaf social, which is really awesome to have that tight knit family kind of community thing. So the interpreter actually continued to interpret for the deaf or for the hearing consumers in the group. So one of the deaf consumers was discussing his devotion to to being a Christian, and to kind of explain what he does to show his devotion to being a Christian. And anyway, here's the sentence, and I'll show you how he interpreted it and some of the controls and demands that went with that. So the deaf consumer was talking, and he said, so as you can see, he listed many different types of the Gospels and stories, chapters, verses, specific books from the Bible. But thinking about the goal of his utterance and the meaning of it was more focused towards showing he was a devoted Christian. So not necessarily having to list all those. So the interpreter's interpretation of this in English equivalent was something like, I view myself as a devoted Christian, I study the Bible, and I have a lot of knowledge about the text. So as you can see, all those examples were compressed into an English equivalent that was understood and showed the goal of the sentence. So some of the demands and controls that I saw and that I was able to discuss with the interpreter as well is just the demands of sometimes it's challenging to know what details that the deaf consumer wants included. And so that's always something you kind of have to go back for and listen and process the message before you um, start listing. If you start listing all those examples and that's not the goal, then you're kind of going off what the topic is when you could just compress it. If the consumer sees you not mouthing the words that he's saying, or there's that awkward pause because he just listed all these things and then you just said one sentence, that could be another demand that came up that you would want to go towards listing the examples, even though the focus is to compress and go for the goal and the meaning of the sentence. And maybe the deaf consumer wanted to brag about all the different verses and gospels that he was familiar with. But again, I don't think that was the meaning of the sentence here. Did the deaf consumer want the audience to know that he was familiar with specific verse or chapter? I don't think so, because he was just kind of listing randomly, and you could tell he wasn't being specifically said this one. He was kind of just brainstorming. You could see through his facial expressions and his gestures that he wasn't focusing on one specific. He was just saying in general. And I think another demand and control for me too, but since I am part of the deaf ministry, I know, and I know the new interpreter is new, but I know she meets with them for quite a while now, and she met with them before she started interpreting. and to know that the deaf consumer who was speaking, he's very dedicated, and he kind of leads the deaf ministry, and he is there every week. So we know that he is familiar with all those chapters and the different verses. So including those minute details isn't as salient in this situation. And that's another pre-assignment control that interpreter took, is getting to know the deaf consumers ahead of time, to know that cultural and the linguistics of his signing style and his knowledge of being a Christian. And noticing what the deaf consumer is talking about, the context before the prior utterances. Is he saying, and here's the different verses and chapters that I want to tell you specifically? He didn't say that. His goal, I believe, and I think the interpreter as well, wanted to get the message that he's well versed in the Bible and he's a devoted Christian. And I think that was clearly displayed by her interpretation. Thanks, guys.